Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.
Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce.
Hello and welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections. I'm your host, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce, Chad Amond. I'm delighted to have on the show today Mandy Zalich and Carol Palcic from CASA of Westmoreland. Ladies, thanks for being on the show and the great work that you do. From the Chamber's perspective, I know the great work that CASA does, but I'm happy to have you on the show to make sure that the rest of the community knows the great work that you're doing. So, Mandy, let's get a little bit about your background, how you got to CASA, and what you do for the organization.
Well, Chad, thank you for having us here this morning. We always like to get out in the community and spread the mission of CASA so more people are aware. We often think that it's one of those best kept secrets that a lot of people still don't know what CASA is. And fortunately, with the Chamber giving CASA the Nonprofit of the Year award last year and some of the other things we've been doing the last couple of years, we've been really growing in recognition, but it's still a best kept secret. And it was a best kept secret even to me when I found out about CASA. About 10 years ago, 12, I was working with children and families as a counselor and had somebody tell me about Judge Feliciani and one of our donors getting a CASA program started in Westmoreland County. And even though I worked with kids and families, I had no idea what CASA was because it wasn't in Westmoreland County, it wasn't in Fayette County, it wasn't in the counties I was working in. And so I was kind of like everybody else, what's CASA? And realized what a benefit it was to helping kids in our community and how it could serve Westmoreland County. And I had the benefit of sitting on our steering committee to get the program started. That was in 2006. And then we started serving kids in 2007, and I continued doing work as a therapist and growing as a supervisor at the agency I was with. And then CASA had a few changes, and I ended up switching roles from kind of being a board member with the organization to becoming the executive director in February of 2009.
So you became executive director in February of 2009.
Yes.
Okay.
So we were a couple years in before I started, and so that was an interesting transition, but been there ever since, and I've been so happy to see the program grow over these last almost 10 years that I've been there, and so blessed to see the community support and the fantastic staff we have had, and really helping to grow this great nonprofit to help our community.
Well, we're going to get into the mission of CASA, but tell the listeners what CASA stands for.
So CASA is Court Appointed Special Advocates,
Okay.
which is a fancy word for volunteers being assigned to work with abused and neglected children.
Carol Palcic is the development director for CASA. Carol, how did you get involved with the organization, and when did you come on board?
Well, Chad, I have been involved in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years. I was in Pittsburgh for a while and moved back to Greensburg, which is roots for me. A while ago, but I was not always in the nonprofit sector, but when I came back from Pittsburgh, that's where I landed. And for almost 20 years, I was with another nonprofit doing development and fundraising. And last year, I made the change to CASA, and it was an organization I was familiar with and had toyed with the idea of being a volunteer. And when I changed positions or when I changed jobs, this position became available, and I thought it was something that I really wanted, and had a couple of meetings with Mandy, and I've been on board now to almost 3 months and just loving it. The mission is just incredible.
And your role with CASA is what?
It's development director.
Okay.
So helping to raise the funds to keep the organization going as we rely heavily on community support and donors and grants.
Right. What do they say? No margin, no mission.
Exactly.
Mandy, I'm going to ask you a little bit. We're going to dive into more of what CASA does. What is the mission of CASA, and give us some of the programs that you provide?
So CASA's mission is that we're a volunteer-based organization providing a voice in the courts on behalf of abused and neglected children in Westmoreland County. Those recommendations then from volunteers assist the courts in determining the child's placement in safe and permanent and nurturing homes. And so what that means is that the volunteers who are going out and devoting 10 to 15 hours a month to visit with the child, to meet with the caseworker, to have phone calls with the foster parents or the biological parents, to meet with the teacher, review records, really get a good perspective of everything that's happening in the child's life and making sure that nothing's slipping through the cracks, that certain things aren't getting missed, because the caseworkers in our county are fantastic. We're really blessed in Westmoreland County, but they also have a large case list. And so they're working with maybe 20 cases, which could be 25 to 40 to 50 kids, which could be 50 to 75 adults or larger. And so that's a lot of people to manage, and that's a lot of reports to be reading or teachers to call. And unfortunately, they just don't have time to do what they would love to be able to do every day for the kids in our community. And so that's where a volunteer steps in, because they'll take 1 or 2 cases and they can really devote the time to get to know the child, get to know the parties involved in the case, see if mom and dad are following through with court orders, or talk with the parent's therapist or the person doing visitation. And they're out there kind of spider webbing communications and pulling all of that together. And then whenever our kids have a court hearing, because they're in the custody of the Westmoreland County Children's Bureau, so there has to be a court hearing to ensure that they should remain in placement. The volunteer writes a court report, which is a little scary at first when a volunteer gets started, but we help them. There's a template. We don't leave them kind of stranded on their own. And they write that report with everything they've learned, all of those stuff I was talking about, the people they've met with, how the child's doing physically, emotionally, how they're doing in school, what's their favorite color, and painting a picture for the judge and the hearing officer so that they know what's been going on for the child. And then that volunteer really makes a recommendation, what they think should happen. Should the child remain in care? Are they ready to go home? Should we be looking at adoption? Are the parents needing a little bit more help with certain areas in order to kind of climb that mountain of services that they've been given? What is happening? And that volunteer will sometimes testify in court and be that voice for that child so that it's not getting missed in the court hearing. So people aren't just going through the motions, that there's somebody kind of saying, hey, wait a minute, what about this?
Right. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. We're delighted today to have Mandy Zalich, executive director of CASA of Westmoreland, and Carol Palcic, development director of CASA of Westmoreland. Ladies, give me and the listeners an idea of a standard case. Is it typically with like a divorce case? Is it that the parents are a criminal case? What is the typical case with CASA that you carry?
So my answer is always there isn't a typical case.
Okay.
Because every child in every case is going to be so different. Even in the office, when we see a case coming through, we sometimes, because we've been doing it for a while, think, oh, that's just going to be like XYZ case. And it's not. People make crazy decisions or good decisions and surprise us sometimes. But the kids that we work with are all coming through situations where they've suffered abuse and neglect. So it's not necessarily a divorce or some kind of family upset like that you see with custody. That's a kind of separate side of the court system. All of our kids had to be removed because they were not safe in their environment. And when that happens, the Westmoreland County Children's Bureau has to take custody, and then we get involved. Most of the kids that we serve are younger. So if there's a typical case, it's a lot of kids under the age of 8. Sibling groups we tend to get assigned to because there's more to manage.
So you try to keep the siblings, if the siblings are in the home together, you try to keep those together with the volunteer.
Yes, one volunteer most of the time with a sibling group. A lot of times with our families, we see mental health issues and drug and alcohol. When I did an assessment for Grant a couple years ago, about 95% of our cases involved at least one of the parents with a chemical addiction issue, and 99% of our cases had at least one family member with a diagnosed mental health disorder. Oh, wow. So that's what we see a lot on our cases. And those are two big struggles that are facing that family. And so that kind of sets the stage for the work that the volunteers doing, the services they need to evaluate. We do sometimes work with some older youth, some teenagers, which brings a whole separate dynamic because they've often burned so many bridges by the time they get to us at an older age, and they're not delinquent. They're still considered dependent because they've still suffered some abuse or neglect situation. So through no fault of their own, they're in foster care. But they are teenagers, so they tend to have different behaviors than a 5-year-old, and they've burned bridges. And so often our volunteer is that one consistent person for them and can make a whole difference. So the Corps has been assigning us to more teenagers also. Wow.
Well, give me some stats. You've been in existence since 2007, correct? Mm-hmm. How many children do you serve each year, and has the organization grown over the last 11 years?
Yeah, we have grown tremendously. In 2007, we started serving kids, and we served 15 youth that year through 12 volunteers. And we've grown to the fact that the last 3 or 4 years, we've served about 200 kids a year. So anywhere between 150 and 200 kids is where we've been the last several years. So that's amazing that we've gone from, 15 kiddos to 150 to 200 each year. Right. And that's through growth of the program. Staff size has grown, volunteers have grown. We'll have anywhere between 70 to 85 active volunteers each year the last couple of years, and they're the ones really doing the legwork. And so our goal is to continue to grow in the number of kids we've served, but really proud to say that we're serving about half of the kids that need us in Westmoreland County.
Yeah, that's a pat on your back to CASA that you're serving so many kids at 200 a year, but you're saying you're only able to serve about half of the kids that need to be served.
Correct.
Is that a standard across the country? I mean, if you look at there are other CASAs across the nation.
There are.
Correct, right? So are we on the middle of the bell curve in terms of the problems that we have with kids being served?
I would say we're doing better than other nonprofit type CASA programs. Okay. So some of the CASA programs nationwide are set up a little differently. Some are completely state or county funded, so they can serve all the kids they want because they've got a unlimited pocketbook. Right. Where when you're a nonprofit organization, you have to do all of the stuff that Carol's doing, the fundraising, the grant writing, pounding the streets to keep the lights on. So we're doing better than some of those other nonprofit types, in my opinion. Now, there are some that are flourishing. Lancaster in Pennsylvania does a phenomenal job, very similar to us in their growth, and they're probably serving a higher percentage now than we are. There are certain, I don't want to say that a lot of the nonprofits aren't doing those kinds of things, but it's a struggle. And you do have to set a balance of how much time are you spending on fundraising versus program. And I think we've struck a pretty good balance with our focus over the years, and that's allowed us to keep growing.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. We're going to take a quick break, but whenever we get back, we're going to talk about the impact and how you can be a volunteer with CASA. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.
Welcome back. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. Our guests today are Mandy Zalich. Mandy is the Executive Director of CASA of Westmoreland, and Carol Palcic. Carol is the Development Director of CASA of Westmoreland. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. And before we went to break, we were teasing about the volunteers and the impact that they have and how you can become a volunteer. So, Mandy, let's jump into to how can somebody, what is expected of a volunteer, and how can somebody become a volunteer?
So to become a volunteer, an individual really just has to give us a call in the office or shoot us an email to get the process started, and we would send them an application, pull them in for an interview, and in that interview we talk about what the volunteer role looks like. We go into the nitty-gritty. We can answer questions they have. We'll ask questions of them, really see if it's a good fit, because it is a very unique volunteer role. And once they go through the interview, we do a screening and clearance process, and then we provide training. It's 30 hours of training, so we're not just throwing them out there. And the training covers a variety of topics: poverty, mental health, drug addiction, all kinds of different things to help prepare the volunteer for that role that they're stepping into. It obviously doesn't cover everything, but the 30 plus hours of training gives them a good base. And then once they're sworn in by the court and become active, they have a supervisor. So they always have somebody to go to. If they have a question, they have one consistent supervisor to go back to for questions on their case, or if they're not sure what something is. So that's the process. And there isn't a prerequisite. It's just being able to be dedicated to the case. That really is the big crux, because in a world of changing adults, we want there to be one consistent presence with that volunteer. And so that's what we ask, is that people can stay dedicated for the life of the case. Our average case length is about 16 months, so that's a commitment.
Yeah, this isn't like volunteering for, your church fundraiser,
right,
and having sitting at the table and selling the tickets.
Right.
This is a significant commitment.
It is, which makes it a process to become a volunteer. And if people aren't sure if it's a good fit, when they start the interview process or they go through training, we're always okay with them stepping back and saying, you know what, this isn't what I thought. And we're okay with that, because it's better for them to decide during training than after they're assigned to a case. Okay. So we're okay with having a large training class and lose several people because they realized it was more than they thought. Because sometimes people get started in training and they think it's going to be more. And then when they realize, oh, some of the stuff I'm doing, reading the documents, I'm sitting at home in my pajamas. So yeah, it's 5 to 10 hours or 10 to 15 hours, but 5 of them was sitting in my pajamas on the couch. Yeah, right. So when they realize that there's some flexibility there, it's not always as scary as it seems. So I do encourage people to do the training and start that process if they're not sure, because they can always back out before the training process is over. And we're never going to give them guilt for that, because we know it's such a different type of role.
I would imagine one of the things that when a volunteer, when you're talking with a volunteer, and having myself having spoken with some of the volunteers, the impact that they have on those kids is life-changing.
It is.
Correct?
It is.
I mean, tell the listeners some of the things that you've seen in your years. You've been with CASA for
almost
about
10
decade.
years. Well, yeah.
Almost
in
a
this
decade.
role. Mm-hmm.
But tell the listeners some of the impacts that you have seen firsthand.
So there are so many different impacts, and they're big and small. And we have some cases where maybe the impact of the volunteer wasn't as magnitude because they had a great support system with the family or caseworkers. Sometimes it all just comes together and we're just an extra support. So I know there have been times like that. But then there have been times when I know, and I've heard even from some of the youth, that the volunteer has really saved their lives. Whether it's totally redirected them into a different path, been a consistent support person that they know is just going to keep showing up for them at their court hearings or at their foster homes, or making sure that, they have the basic necessities like socks and underwear. Who wouldn't, as a teenager, you kind of need socks and underwear. And if you've only got one pair and they're holy, you're not going to do too well in the social strata of high school. And so there are lots of little things that the volunteers do, but there are also a lot of big things. And some of our older youth have really said, if it wasn't for my volunteer, I know I wouldn't be going to college, or I know I wouldn't be making these good decisions, or and they've really saved their lives. And there are probably instances where the volunteer has spoke up at the court hearings and has changed the direction of the case because they said, well, the kids are afraid to go here. Can't we relook at this? And getting people to start asking questions that weren't getting asked. And big and small, making sure that they're in the right education placement. We had one youth years ago, right when the program started, who was struggling in school. He was in foster care, and he kept getting moved to learning support and emotional support, and his behaviors were magnifying. They were getting worse. Oh my gosh, what do we do? The volunteer at the time was a retired educator, was meeting with the kiddo at the foster home, was bringing books. The child's reading the books and thriving. And so the volunteer said, we really need to have him evaluated. He belonged in the gifted program. So his behaviors were acting out because he was so bored. Right. But nobody had realized that he really belonged in the gifted program. And once he was moved, thrived and changed the direction of this young man's life forever. Had he stayed in learning support and continued to have bad behaviors, he would have been a delinquent kid. He would have been, stereotyped, wouldn't have had the support that you get with the gifted program, the challenges, would have continued to struggle, and his life would have gone a completely different area. Right. And that was just through the volunteer. That's just one instance of the volunteer saying, hey, let's do this. Because they noticed something that nobody else noticed, because there's so much going on, so many fires to put out that sometimes you're not noticing. Shouldn't the child be speaking a little more at 3? Should we get them evaluated? And right. Pinpointing some areas that can really help the child thrive.
And this impact is being conducted on 200 kids a year.
Correct. Yeah.
The same sort of impact. Well, I'm gonna shift over to Carol for a second. And when we look at April is Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month, and I had mentioned earlier, your role as the development director and helping to raise the funds. If there's no margin, there's no mission in a not-for-profit organization. We can talk all day about the impact that's having for the kids and all of that stuff. But if you're not generating any money to make sure that you're paying the staff and you're keeping the lights on and you're able to do the training and things like that for the volunteers, that the impact is not happening. So let's talk a little bit about the program that you are helping to run for the development.
Okay. Right now, Chad, there's 3 major fundraisers that CASA does. The first one is coming up on Friday, April the 27th. It is our leadership breakfast. And at that breakfast, we will be recognizing our Volunteer of the Year, who has been with us for many years. I'm not quite sure how many, but then there's also the 10-year service awards that will be going to 5 of the volunteers that have been a constant with us for the last 10 years. And during that breakfast, CASA is rolling out our annual giving campaign, or our planned giving challenge. And we have a very generous donor who has challenged us that if we can raise $25,000 in this year, he will match it. So that's a big push for us to get things rolling. So that will be Phil Couch from the Community Foundation will be speaking to that at the breakfast on the 27th. And then besides the breakfast, there are 2 other fundraisers. The one is our golf outing, which brings in about $50,000 to the organization, and that will take place at the end of August 24th, at the Latrobe Country Club. And then on November the 3rd, we have our fall gala at a club in Ligonier. So those are the 3 big fundraisers that we do. And then, of course, there's the grant writing, and there's the Friends Giving, or the Friends Building, that we do throughout the year with different organizations and different individuals. So a lot of that is what I have on my plan, or my personal plan, is to get out and to really meet folks that are not familiar with CASA and to introduce them to the program and sort of get that relationship building.
Having been to all 3 of your fundraisers, I will say, and I'm going to give you an endorsement, the listeners, you need to jump on the CASA website. Carol, what is the CASA website? It is It is one of the three of events, the breakfast. I will say this: it is inspiring. I will tell you firsthand that people have walked away with tears in their eyes because of the good work that CASA does. But if they want to jump onto that website, what is the website to make sure that they understand where the breakfast is?
They need to go to westmorelandcasa.org, or they can give us a call at 724-850-6874, and we can fill them with more information, get more information out to them about the breakfast. But I sort of compare it not ever being at the breakfast, but it's much like the chamber breakfast, the prayer breakfast in January.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, and it's always packed house. I would imagine that you are going to sell it out again this year. So I would encourage those listeners to jump on the site and make sure that they register right away. And for the golf outing, if you're a golfer out there and you have never gotten the opportunity to play Arnie's course in Latrobe Country Club, you check two things off the list. You check one off the list of supporting an incredible organization, and you check off the list that you get to golf at one of the greatest golf courses maybe in the country, right?
absolutely. And that event too does sell out, Chad. So for all those out there listening, go to the website. Again, it's westmorelandcasa.org, and we can get you more information, an invitation out to the golf outing, as well as the breakfast and our gala in the fall.
Oh yeah, and the gala, having going to the black tie gala, it is one of the premier events that you have the opportunity to go to each year, and you guys do such great work. If you would say that, what is the most impactful and the most satisfied that you have been? I'll let Carol answer this one first. You've been with the organization for a shorter time than Mandy, but when you're working on the front line, what is the thing that impacts you most?
Probably the fact that the cases that I've seen are the children that are so young and really need a strong support system to get them across that bridge, and to see the supervisors working with the advocates, and to see the love, the care, the concern that they have for these children. It's heartwarming. It's just something to see, Chad.
Mandy, you have a lot more time with CASA. What is the most impactful piece that you've seen working on the front line for about a decade?
I was standing here thinking about it as Carol was answering, and I've kind of got two pieces that are that stand out to me as one impactful and two kind of rewarding, having seen it over 10 years. One of the most impactful I think of is our volunteer of the year a couple years ago, Flo. She always seems to get these really emotional cases, and I've given this example over and over again, and I think because it resonates with me so much, was a young man, sibling group. They were 5 and 7, and they moved multiple times, multiple foster homes. And when they moved one time, they said to Flo, the older boy said to Flo, "I didn't think you were going to find me this time." And she's like, "I'm always going to find you." And unfortunately, they moved again. And Flo shows up at the door, kind of knocks on the door, and the young man this time is in tears, and "You did find me." And she said, "Yes, I'm always going to find you." And at that moment, for that young man, he knew she wasn't going away. There was, with all the changes, in his young life and all of the scary trauma he had, one person was going to come back. And it helped change the trajectory of their case forever. But then the other side of it is a little more realistic and a little more program. When we started CASA really 12 years ago with our steering committee, and then when the program got rolling, there was a lot of people who really didn't think we were going to make it. And to this day, when we have meetings and I talk about, how many kids we've served and the staff has grown to 6, and They told me to my face they didn't think we were going to survive, that we weren't going to serve this many kids, that we were just going to be, on our little office, our two people. And our desire has always been to serve all of the kids in Westmoreland County, and that drives all of us going forward. And so that's a pride to me, that when I hear people say, still to this day, I didn't think you were going to survive. Well, we're not going anywhere. So we're here to help the kids and make a difference.
And you are. We thank you very much for the work that you do in the community. Mandy Zalich and Carol Palcic, the critical team for CASA of Westmoreland. If you want to learn more about CASA of Westmoreland, jump onto their website. It's westmorelandcasa.org. That's westmorelandcasa.org, or call them at 724-850-6874. That's 724-850-6874. You've been listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Join us next week, same time, same place, for another edition of Westmoreland Community Connections. Thanks for listening, everyone.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.